Hey guys, we're in Mark chapter 12. We're in the last week of Jesus' life still. He's still in the temple, and he's having all these Jewish religious sects and political sects coming and asking him their questions, trying to trip him up, trying to make him look bad, trying to find something to accuse him of. First it was the chief priests, the elders, and the scribes. Then it was the Pharisees and the Herodians. And yesterday it was the Sadducees. And now today it's going to be one man. It's going to be a scribe that has been sitting back, listening to all the questions, hearing how Jesus answered them. And it says that he perceived that Jesus had answered them wisely. And notice when he finishes asking his question, Jesus answers. It says no one even dared to ask him any more questions. They've been asking him these questions hoping he'll look bad, but he turns it around on them and he makes them look bad and he makes himself look good. That's not what you really want to do. And so this man's question has more to do with the law. And maybe there's some things for us to note about scribes. Scribes would have gone to school and had more schooling and more schooling and more schooling. They basically would have had their PhD in Old Testament studies. They would have had a lot of the Old Testament memorized. And so let's look at his question about the Old Testament and the Old Law. It says, then one of the scribes came, and having heard them reasoning together, perceived that he had answered them well. Asked him, which is the first commandment of all? This was a question that was heavily debated by the Jews in Jesus' day, and really something, to some degree, something that is debated today. So which is the first of all the commandments? Which is the greatest commandments? There were over 613 different commandments, at the very least, in the Old Testament. So Jesus could have answered 613 different ways. Do not murder, do not covet, do not steal. He could have said, keep the Sabbath, which seemed to be important to them. But Jesus doesn't answer it in any way. Usually we would maybe ask it this way: which one commandment can I keep? And maybe not so much keep the other ones and get away with it and still go to heaven. I think Jesus answers it in a way that none of us would answer, and probably not in a way that any of us would think. In fact, Jesus goes to something that I don't think they would have considered to be a commandment at all. Look at Jesus' answer in verse 29. Jesus answered him, the first of all the commandment is, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. This is the first commandment. And the second like it is this: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these. So Jesus quotes Deuteronomy chapter 6. The Jews would have known it as the Shema, something that they memorized and they recited 2 times a day for their entire life. And so this is one of those verses that just everybody knows. It's like the John 3 verse 16 of the Old Testament. And so he says, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. This is the greatest commandment because it leads you to obeying the rest of the commandments. It's kind of like the underlying principles that cause you to do what God says. And so you could break it up. You could say, well, heart, soul, mind, and start dividing on what those things mean. But really what Jesus is saying is that you love God with every ounce of who you are. Everything that makes you up, you're to love God with. And that's really great insight, because if we were to answer this question, I don't know if we would have put such emphasis on loving God. And so if this is the greatest commandment, then how are we doing with it? And you see that Jesus doesn't just give one great commandment, he gives the second one too, which is interconnected to the first. That you love your neighbor as yourself. That if you love God, you're going to love others and you're going to serve them. And Jesus, in a lot of different places, makes sure that the Jews didn't mistake this to loving somebody like yourself, like the rest of the Jews. Loving your neighbor means even loving your enemies. Like in Luke chapter 10, where we had the Samaritan. And so if loving God leads to loving our neighbor, then how are we doing with that one too? And so let's look at this man's answer, reply back to Jesus. Verse 32, it says, so the scribe said to him, well said, teacher, you have spoken the truth. For there is one God, and there is no other but he. And to love him with all your heart, with all the understanding, with all the soul, with all the strength, and to love one's neighbor as oneself, is more than all the whole burnt offerings and sacrifices. Now when Jesus saw that he had answered wisely, he said to him, you are not far from the kingdom of God. But after that, no one dared question him. Out of all the groups and out of all the people that questioned Jesus that day, this man seems to be the most fair-minded. At the very least, this man was able to say that Jesus had answered him rightly. You remember back with the question with authority, they didn't even give him an honest answer. They just said, we don't know. And so Jesus says, you are not far from the kingdom of God. Compared to everybody else that day, he really wasn't that far off. So Jesus, at the very least, he's complimenting his heart and his attitude. And I guess when we go to God and we have questions and we turn to his word and try to find answers, are we really trying to seek out truth? Or are we just trying to figure out what we can get away with? We got to have a good heart. What are some challenging thoughts today? And I think these two great commandments are really challenging to us. How are we doing with those things?